Hey guys, Jensen here once again. NA has gone 0-9 in the group stage, and I thought that with me doing a video on EG already, it would be interesting to take a look at the other two teams from NA and try to figure out a little bit as to why they're struggling and if there's any hope for them in the second round robin. Now, the question isn't, there's some people even saying that if they're going to take a second tier to tower at all. I think one of these two teams would have a good shot of winning some games and having an outsider's chance of performing a miracle 3-0 and perhaps maybe even squeaking into the quarterfinals. I wouldn't say the odds of that are particularly high, but let's take a look at what the analysis tells us and we can figure out if that's possible ourselves. Right, let's start a little bit with Cloud9, and I think that the philosophy from Cloud9, be it from playoffs to worlds, and both metas, it has been creating inevitability through scaling conditions, and this is how they found success during the playoffs patch. However, during Worlds, the meta has changed quite a fair bit. In playoffs, their team identity had them playing team fighting tops, carry junglers, scaling mids, a hyper AD carry, a hyper carry AD carry, and enchanter supports to fill that. And this was something that they played around Berserker, who was definitely the standout performer during the LCS playoffs itself. However, this during Worlds has in itself flipped on its head quite a fair bit, with them trying to play carry tops and then enabling junglers for then carry junglers, with things being flipped around in terms of priorities quite a fair bit, where instead of simply waiting to scale and waiting for the Sivir and Zeri to come online, playing through a dominant bot lane 2v2 with the Enchanter, there's a lot more about moving around the map with the champions that they have drafted. Now, the group stage itself had them going up against Fnatic, and Fnatic had a very strong response in terms of the Maokai and Ornn against what Cloud9 had. So Fnatic put them in a position where they weren't able to win 5v5, and Cloud9 were required to play the map, something that they weren't too capable of doing with their approach to its map play. And against EDG, this was a game where their lack of mid agency resulted in them losing into a 2v2 mid, and the game snowballed rather quickly from there. Whereas their third game against T1, once again drafting due to this very heavy scaling aspect, results in them having no early game agency, and T1 just completely takes over the game, ending the game around just above the 20-minute mark, rushing a 20-minute Baron at a point of time. Now, there's been a lot of criticisms towards Cloud9 at World so far, saying that it's been pretty much draft cap. However, I think that for us to have a more sort of sophisticated understanding as to what's happening with Cloud9, we have to take a look as to what their problems are this world as well. So, bot meta read is definitely something that's popped up, and I think that this is where the European teams have done very well, where they have been able to play Ambassador Delusion, Nami, play Kalista lanes, whereas some of the other teams are going back to Renata lanes as well. Whereas Cloud9, if they wanted to play for this style, they definitely needed more agency around bot lane and enable support movements to compensate for the fact that they're drafting a scaling mid that will require support and jungle resources to build them out of their matchups. The other issue that they have is their macro. I think that watching the way that they have been managing Herald has been an issue, where they aren't decisive enough, and we see them contesting a Herald late and simply watching the opponent take the Herald and not being able to get anything significant and not creating an effective stall. While they are eventually matching the Herald play, there's definitely some areas of improvement that can be done over there. And if they want to play such carry tops, the side laning macro has to be a lot more towards the LPL style rather than the LCK style of playing 1-1-2-2 or 1-3-1 and simply trying to catch farm. Because if they are not able to advance the map and create deep bushes into the side lanes, they will also find difficulty in accessing angles to take team fights with. And I would have to say that their overall compositions, this is where people were criticizing them for. There's a little bit of incongruence in terms of their team identity. My personal gripe is that I feel that their mid picks are a little bit too greedy if they wanted to play this way. In addition to just volatility in the top lane, if we had Jensen or something that's able to contest from the prior more and be able to fog onto the top side of the map, that probably would have helped this team identity quite a fair bit more. So, what's the fix? It's rather simple for Cloud9, right? Like, they need to look at what's being played and say that actually it's possible for us to play around Berserker again. That's what worked for them, and they can kind of go back to doing that. And in fact, EVG within the same group has kind of demonstrated a blueprint for that already. So increasing the amount of prior that they have in Azir to kind of compensate for the fact that they trend towards scaling mids, and then going for the likes of the Philos Renata, Sivir Yumi could be their answer to trying to find wins again. However, the bad news for them is that with EDG and T1, this will result them in mirroring their group opposition and fighting them strength for strength in the scenarios. I would have to say though, in Cloud9's position, I don't really think that their options are too rich, at this point of time, because sticking to the guns at this point of time, their current form is too far from a coherent product for them to want to say, hey, let's continue to play around Fiora, let's continue to play around Jax. Now, for 100 Thieves, this is a team that, from what you've heard from interviews, from what you've heard from people going on podcasts and stuff like that, mistake reduction is kind of the core of their philosophy, right? So you have two teams so far that are representing NA that have leaned very heavily into the let's scale and wait for our opponents to make mistakes, capitalize on those mistakes, and try to win the game from there. Now, 100 Thieves had similar drafting issues as well, where they went into the first game against Flying Oyster, going for the likes of a top side of Akali, Sejuani, and Fiora. Once again, three very greedy champions in their own regards, and very low in terms of agency. And while I would say that this is kind of congruent with their team identity, there's some problems with that. With this low agency in the early game, the first star was only taken in 100 Thieves' favor only at 20 minutes. So with the way that they're playing the game, they're not overloading on the side lanes that I think you need to do with this. They're not able to really get good access to the Rift Heralds, and this results in them not really being able to take the fight to their opponents. So all they can do is just sit back and skill. Now, this is still possible, but the way the 100 Thieves plays is largely through mid, and you would see them send 4 people, 5 people through mid in a lot of the mid-game scenarios, and it results in them, instead of having the side lanes pushed out, which is what you kind of want as Akali and Fiora, their side lanes are being pushed in instead. And as a consequence of that, they still can play for the scaling teamfight win condition, but their execution in these were rather poor. And that kind of sets the trend over here. So even when they abandoned the strategy and they went to something that they're a little bit more comfortable with, like in their series approach against Genji and RNG, where they went for the likes of Aatrox and Zamde and Talia on Abadage, they still had issues, although the games here, they definitely had more of a direction. They lost team fights and crucial objectives, right? And I think the big idea here is that time after time, they will find themselves in these good positions where they would be setting up to contest Drake number 3, Drake number 4, and they would have first set up in the river. However, their management of teamfights around the scenario, instead of simply holding where I have this red line drawn out, they would play a little bit too far up, play a little bit too greedily, or not properly bodyguard or mark the possible angles of engage that the opponents can come from. And as a result, they will be losing these teamfights and crucial objectives. So for 100 Thieves, I actually think that the fix for them, once again, is the 1-for-1, right? Looking at the problems that they're having, is to say that just teamfight better, right? And from a coaching perspective, this can be done by going through the players, talking about what is your role in these team fights, identifying what is the mode of team fight. Are you going forwards? Are you supposed to be letting the opponents come into you? Which is something that I think he was struggling with in the games against Genji, where you saw him engaging onto the mid lane and simply dying even before the fight started, before anybody was in position, or he not really knowing that he was supposed to be marking the Azir coming over the wall at that point of time. So that raw identification and identifying the mode of team fight is probably something the 100 Thieves, they can just go back, watch the replays, and talk about, okay, we are putting ourselves in a good position. How do we win from this point of time, right? And get everybody to say that this is their job and how they can approach this from this scenario. So macro-wise, I think one more thing that they can do to help their chances as well in these scenarios is have a very clear plan of the 1 minute away from Dragon Spawn Timer, and really get down the 0-4-1 movement to really flash out any approaches that the opponents have through bot. So there's something that I noticed as well in terms of Drake setup, which is one of the criticisms that was thrown the way of 100 Thieves, is that they were not properly marking out the flanks, and this failure to do the 0-4-1 was a consequence of that as well. The good news for 100 Thieves, though, is that this style of play is very functionally similar to the 3-0 teams in Rogue and JDG. However, where they play this low agency activity early style that plays towards this getting team fights. However, they actually need to start winning the crucial team fights. And I wouldn't say that that's all too impossible. And for 100 Thieves, they do not need to drastically change things from the way that they were drafting against RNG and Genji, but I do think that there's a few champions that they can look at that can really bolster their chances in the draft phase. The first of which is Maokai, which we have already established is a team fighting and zone control monster. Taking team fights against Maokai is extremely difficult on both sides, whether you're engaging into him or he's engaging into you. And the other champion that I think can help who he out is Rakan, as this is a champion that gives him a lot more space, buys a lot more room for error as well. So if he makes positioning mistakes or if he commits wrongly, it's not so board committed as playing a Leona or Nautilus would be. And with that, I would say that 100 Thieves at the start, like I mentioned, that there's a chance that they can make it, and I would think that of the three NA teams, 100 Thieves, with all of them being, considering that all three teams are 0-3 at this point of time, 100 Thieves probably has the best chance, not that it's very high, of making out to the quarterfinal stage. With that, this is a look at NA struggles. Do check out my other video on EG as well, and if you enjoy this style of content, please do like the video and consider subscribing to my channel. With that, this was Jensen once again, and I hope you get hyped for Worlds.